My name is jpitcher, and I am with the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. They are based out of New York City, and I am based out of right outside of Annapolis, Maryland on the East Coast, where we are experiencing an explosion of allergies while the rest of the country is getting snow, and we are now in early spring and we're all snarfling on the East Coast right now. So that's been super fun for all of us in mid-March. I always love to give a little weather update working with folks. And the Michael J. Fox Foundation has launched a new, as of last year, state government relations office. It's myself and my teammate, Zach Hardy, who's on today, and I'll let him do a little introduction in a minute. And I love working with Larry because this gives us the opportunity to work with so many folks across the world. And then I get to drill down and work on state government relations. And so for those who don't know me, I've been in the lobbying field and government relations field for about 20 years. Mostly based in Maryland, but also nationally and across different states, regionally, depending on where I was working. I used to work for a firm and was client-based, and then I worked for Pharma, the trade association for brand name pharmaceuticals in the United States, and now most recently I'm with the Fox Foundation. And this is new, as Larry experiences and talks with us a lot, and many of you may or may not know, the Parkinson's community in the United States on both a state and federal level has not had overly active advocacy in what we consider the legislative arena in 25 years. And it's very big in the states to have, special interest groups. Everything's a special interest group, from, homeowners to, senior issues to education. I mean, you all know what we're talking about. But that has been lacking in the Parkinson's arena. There are plenty of incredible Parkinson's care groups, support groups, and other organizations, but no one has really taken on policy, government relations, lobbying, whatever term of art you want to use, advocacy, until a couple of years ago when my boss, our senior vice president, Ted Thompson, decided to start doing that. So we started that on a federal level, and now we have a state level, and we want to give you a little bit of a taste of what you're going to see or what you're going to hear about what we're working on. And you all can take some of that information and use it with your own organizations. We don't want to gatekeep anything. It's here for all of our community members, and we want to be a resource. Although it is going to be very state capital specific, I do think it's helpful to hear what we're doing in the United States with state capitals, because a lot is happening here. And, I love to hear different takes from you all at the end of, questions and what we can do to help with being a resource to everyone. So I'm going to go to the next one. This is our team. I always like to start off just so that everyone gets a little bit of a visual. The Michael J. Fox Foundation total in New York has about 225 employees now, and we have 7. So we're big, but we're tiny at the same place. So Ted is our boss, and I'm over there, and Dustin's over there. Oh, they have my old name. It's actually jpitcher again. We'll change that. And we have a federal side, which is Mason and Nora, and we're actually actively recruiting for an additional federal person right now. We have Megan, who works for TED. She is our associate director who focuses on environmental and health issues. She's actually a PhD by trade. And then it is myself and Zach. And then we have Ashley, who is an administrative assistant, but she does actually support the whole team. I just happen to be her direct manager at this time. So that's just a little org chart of who we are and where we are. We're all based in the DC. Almost all of us are based. I just thought about that. 2 of us, Zach and Megan, are in New York and Illinois, and the rest of us are based in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, just for our visualization piece. The federal team works obviously closely in the DC area, and Zach and I travel all over the country to work with state capitals. So understanding where we are as state legislatures, I think it's really important to talk a little bit about the layout and why, state is so heavily important when it comes to working on advocacy in the United States, is because there's a lot of turnover. And last fall, there was what's known as the midterm election, which on the federal level, Congress folks who need to run every 2 years. This is their midterm in between the 4 years that others run. And then there's a lot of, all the governors were up for re-election. I'm sorry, almost all the governors were up for election, and almost every state was up for election. There were a lot of turnover. And what we like to see is to see who's in control. And right now, if you look at the United States, the state legislatures are majority controlled by Republican majority. And that means either one or both houses are truly in control. And the split control is only in 3 states. And then the lighter orange is Democratic control. So, you know, Zach and I have talked a lot about, you hear about different things happening in the country, or you hear about those, you know, elite or coastal cities, or California, or the New York elites, et cetera, this, that, and the other. And then you hear about those middle states. And really, when you look at it in color, it really is important to understand like who is controlling what and what is happening and where we are. So we may have a Democratic president right now and retained a Democratic majority in Congress, but states, there are 50 states that have miniature, you know, Congresses every year, and they meet every single year. Right now, all 50 states, except Louisiana, they don't get started until next month. 49 out of 50 states are currently meeting for their legislative sessions. And a fun little history fact on that is the reason that state legislatures meet in the middle of winter, they usually start the second week of January, is because as our country was founded back in the day, we were agrarian, and the colonies were agrarian and farmers. So the men who were, you know, going to start this country and start the colonies, what did they do in the wintertime? They didn't have anything. They didn't have anything to do. They were all farmers, and harvest times were spring, summer, and fall. So they decided to meet in January after the new year. And so the majority of state constitutions that got started in those early 13 colonies got started with the first or second week of January, and some changed it. And that is just proliferated across as the United States came to be, as the United States for the last 250 years. So that's why we meet in the middle of the winter, and everything is happening all at the same time. Additionally, with state legislatures to know, not every state, but the majority have to pass both a full state budget, which includes what are considered mandates like Medicaid and educational requirements, and then a balanced budget for all other state required funding like transportation, et cetera. And then the little piece that's left over is considered policy. And so the policy bills have to also get heard and then decided whether or not they have funding attached to them. And with that, on average, there is usually around 125,000 pieces of legislation that are heard across the country in state legislatures every year. There are 7,728 elected officials in the 50 states. I know it's wild. It's absolutely wild. So you're talking about, on average, each chamber having around 100 to 120 people, and each state roughly hearing 3,000-ish bills per year. And that can be also between 60 days and 120 days. So we're talking rapid fire, tons of bills, tons of things happening very, very quickly. Now, the state of Delaware has like 30 people in their legislature, as does Nebraska. They are unicameral. They only have a Senate and a governor, and there's 48 of them. But then you look at like New York and California, and there's a couple hundred. I think there's like 400 in California. It's as big as Congress. And, you know, the state of California, I think Zach was reminding me of the number, is the 6th largest economy in the world. So it's pretty wild what happens in the United States when it comes to state legislative issues. And, you know, you all read the news. We got a lot of things happening over here in our country, some good, some wild, some taking us backwards. And then you have to fight through the noise on everything else. So you're talking your healthcare, your social services, your access to care, all of that has to fight through that noise in very short periods of time. And legislatures tend to meet very quickly. So if you don't get it done within 60 to 90 days, you got to start all over again and do it again the next year. So that is why I am highly caffeinated pretty much during this period of the time. And then in July, I sleep a lot to catch up when everyone's done. So I'd like to get into what our #1 priority is in the states. We are working on what are called research registries. And for those who have heard me talk about this before, you've heard our national group, our federal group, talk about the national plan to end Parkinson's. This dovetails a lot with that initiative. So when I came on board, we were looking at what could be a good state initiative to work on. And California had already passed a state research registry, and that I took that and started to run with it this last year. And the idea behind a research registry is the state would collect population data from current living Parkinson's patients, de-identify it, publish an annual report of incidence and prevalence, and then ultimately our goal is to feed that information up to the CDC, which is the Centers for Disease Control, which is in DC, and that they already have a national hub that researchers in the United States and around the globe can access to get better quality patient population information on Parkinson's patients to do better qualitative studies that also could be related to clinical trials. So you see that there's a little bit of a patchwork of colors on this map. Like I said, California passed the bill, and it's pretty much our model for the country. It works with the Department of Health, and it's up and running, and it's really grand, and it's also being expanded into other neurodegenerative diseases, which we completely support and ultimately see this as a long-term goal. As our office develops, we get some of these registries going. We want to partner with other neurological groups like MS, ALS, et cetera, and work together on this because it's critically important for all patients. Washington State and Utah, you'll see up there on the left, those two are in orange. They have registries, but they're voluntary and they're not truly funded. So we consider those passed, but also not fully functional. And then the blue states, the navy blue states, are where Zach and I are currently working and with proactive bills where they're either advocate-led or lobbyist-led or through another champion that we know through a lawmaker. So those are Hawaii, Oregon, Colorado, Nebraska, Missouri, Ohio, Maryland, New York, and Massachusetts. We may have a bill starting in Nevada, but that may be a little bit too late to get it going, but we do have some things in the works. If we don't get through the deadlines this year, we'll come back and do it next year. Nebraska has stripes across it because Nebraska actually has a registry. They were the first to have one 25 years ago in 1996. And actually, I think that's now 27 years ago, if I do my math correctly. And it's still on paper. So it's functional, but it's not functional. And it's using some antiquated technology. So what we have is we are calling that a current registry, but we have a proactive bill to update that in the Nebraska legislature right now. I'm actually going to pause because I see that Larry has a question.
Yeah, well, so in the comments, how do we know that they are confirmed with a Parkinson's diagnosis when they register?
Oh, that's a great question. It's going to come from DSM or ICD-10 codes that will come through a neurologist will have to confirm it through their electronic medical record. So Larry, I'm going to pick on you and call you so let's say you lived in the state of Missouri and you were a patient in the United States and you just recently got a diagnosis through your neurologist. Your neurologist will have an electronic medical record. That ICD-10 code or the DSM code that is put in will then be funneled up to the Department of Health, and then you'll be de-identified. So it's not going to just say Larry Gifford on it. Right. It's going to say male, age, date of diagnosis, any comorbidities, et cetera, Parkinsonisms that you may have, and then it'll call you a number. So you'll be like QXT 1234.
That's when I have the back of my shirts. QXT.
Oh, perfect. Exactly. So you know, and it'll be like, your football number on the back. Yeah. And then from there, it will be aggregated and that will go to the CDC. So the idea is that also the departments of health, as they pull this data, they will also cross-reference with vital statistics to make sure that it's actually living and not, so if somebody does pass away, they can cross-reference and see and take them off the list if they've passed away.
And then the other question I had is, are these registries that are active and the ones that we're bringing on board? I know the Michael J. Fox Foundation just sent some money to West Virginia to start up theirs. Are we collecting the same data points so we can cross-reference?
Great question. We have decided not to legislate each individual line item, mostly because if things change or like medicine and healthcare change, which we know changes often, we don't want to have to go back and have to fix individual bills in multiple states. So the idea is that it's like standardized and that the registry advisory committee that is part of that legislation can decide if there should be anything that changes. But generally, it's going to be your general, name, age, date of diagnosis, comorbidities, Parkinsonisms, and any other comorbidities. That'll be the general piece to start. Now, later, let's say your information goes up to the CDC, and there's a researcher, and I heard somebody who's on the line from Portugal, and let's say Portugal has a researcher that wants to talk to things and study some things in the United States. They could pull that data and do patient contact surveys through a request to gain that information and reach out to states and say, oh, look, you live in this area. We see that there's a pattern, or we're looking at women under 30 who are, diagnosed, in 20s. I don't know, just coming up with some wild, potential research ideas.
Eloise from the APDA wants to know how you decide which states you're prioritizing for registries.
I love this question. They have actually come on organically. A couple of them came through advocates in Oregon and Hawaii. We have incredible patient advocates who stepped up, contacted us, said, we want to do this. Zach and I trained them. We met with them many, many times, and we would give them the language. They would go meet with legislators. They'd get us on the line with them, and then we would go forward with putting in the bill that way. Other states we needed to, but also certain states you just really do need to have some consultants on the ground. And we have a little bit of budget right now for a few. So we've hired a couple lobbyists on the ground to help us work that, and then also reaching out to patients. So we've been really working with our friends at APDA and PF, and then other organizations for additional patient advocates, as well as working with champions. There are also 2 states that in Ohio and Missouri are actual professional lobbyists who also were recently diagnosed, who have asked to do this for us and to work with us. And so that is truly incredible. In Missouri, especially, is a gentleman who retired 2 years ago through his Parkinson's diagnosis, heard about this, heard about national plan, heard about that we had an advocacy office, tracked us down and said, what can I do? I do this for a living. I've recently retired, but I know everyone. And I said, yes, we'd like to work with you. Yeah. So that's really how we've picked it, based on places, but we do want to be a smattering of, population diversity, geographic diversity as well. So we're hoping to get into that lower, like South area, and then the upper north middles as we can. And
then a couple of years ago, the CDC got like $5 million to create a national registry. Whatever happened to that?
It's still going. I'm glad you brought that up. There is going to be reauthorization of that. I think they're asking for an additional amount of money. I'll have to look to see. I think it's 5 plus an additional 4. So I think 9 million total. And they're looking to reauthorize that. It's still going. It still is there. The issue is that we met with the CDC last fall, and they are not empowered to go out and tell states, hey, send us your information. So what they told us is that we need to have more states online. Then we basically, as the Fox Foundation, can go back to the CDC and say, look, we got all these states going. Can you flip the switch? And then we can authorize that through the federal side, that they can extract the information, and then it'll be a long time electronic feed on a yearly basis, et cetera. So it's not happening yet, but that's the plan as we get more online.
And what's the tipping point? How many states?
They did not tell us that. So my goal is to have about 10, I think would be probably a decent number, a fifth of the country.
Great. So. Sorry. Now back to you.
No, that's great. These are excellent questions. So with that, I've pretty much gone through most of this. This PowerPoint, I'm going to go ahead and email it out to all of you as well, that you can have, or I think I sent it to Larry. But you can read here that these are some of the updates with bill numbers, with links on there as well, that you all can access if you're interested in reading, nerdy bill language from each state. Colorado is unfortunately not going to be able to get through this year. Their fiscal outlook is an absolute mess for the entire state. They had they cut their sales tax, they cut some other taxes, and then realized that they put themselves in red, and are not able to fund additional new programs this year. So that's that. Hawaii, Maryland, and Massachusetts are going right now. Maryland will end their legislative session in 3 weeks. I am starting starting to pull my hair out. I will be down there tomorrow for a meeting and the Bless You Senate hearing. And we're going from there. Massachusetts is slower. They're going to be meeting throughout the year. They've got a long session this year, all year. So Zach gets to go into Boston when things start to heat up later this spring. The second slide is also additional other states where the vote is. Missouri, I will be going out next week for the bill hearing. They do not have any remote options, so I have to go in person. Nebraska, I was out there a few weeks ago during a wonderful 10-inch snowstorm. I loved it since we haven't had any snow out my way. New York, Ohio, and Oregon are in process. Ohio is also a slow state, not so rapid fire sprint as others. So these are coming up, and we can also put this into like a chart if people want to see that.
Great.
So on top of that, we have like 3 other areas that we are going to be focusing on. So you can see that registry bills were our huge proactive piece this year. And the reason we started with that is because it's directly related to the mission of the Michael J. Fox Foundation, which is aggressive research and funding for Parkinson's. But there are other really important issues on a policy and that happen in states that we want to get involved in. This one in particular, environmental transparency, is a issue that we are working towards having the best concept draft and are starting to have these conversations with lawmakers. It's very controversial. As many of you know, there's the lawsuit that the Michael J. Fox Foundation and Earth Justice and many other organizations are suing the EPA that currently has a stay, and it's going to be re-reviewed. It put us in a weird spot to be able to put, ban type legislation into state legislatures while we've got litigation going on. So something that we've come up with is to talk about increasing environmental transparency, because we can go in and try to ban toxic chemicals, but we also don't have any data on where they're being used. So like the state of Virginia, for example, it's very agricultural. There's many farmers. There's plenty of, tobacco fields and others that are still down there. Where is it being used? So could we require states to, put out like a splatter map of where are these applications being granted and where are they being used, and then create that whole what is called NIMBY, not in my backyard, idea of people saying, oh, look, this is where these toxic chemicals are being used. Maybe we should all come together and go to the legislature and ban them. So it's a little bit of a step 1, step 2, step 3. So we've been floating this concept in states where we're starting to get active, because again, we're developing relationships with state capitals and lawmakers. And so this is something that we're going to be, talking more and more about this year, next year, and in future years, is to require state we're calling it environmental transparency. We're not focusing on one specific chemical, but if we need to, as like a pilot, we would name a few to say, well, let's just know where they are. And then you can tell us state X, Y, and Z, where are you using this chemical? And then what are we going to do about it? So another thing that is popping up, there's this one and one other subject matter that relate very closely to our research credo, and also something that we think is incredibly important for the community: genetic testing protections. So there's a federal law known as GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, that prohibits discrimination related to health insurers. But there's no protections on the state level or the federal level per se when it comes to life insurance, long-term care, or disability insurance. So for example, and I'm going to use myself as this because this is something that I found really fascinating. I had to get genetic testing done when I was pregnant because I was of a geriatric age, according to the OBGYNs. Well, I've gone ahead and done that. Who's to know if I'm going to have a Parkinson's diagnosis 5 years from now, 10 years from now? I don't know. But that could prohibit me from gaining disability insurance, long-term care, et cetera, because I had this previous genetic testing done 7 years ago. And that's, I think it's predatory, practices. And so we are joining in with other organizations to support these bills. They are currently a smattering of different bills going across the country. Some are what we're calling the trifecta, where they're looking for these protections on all 3 types of insurance, and some are just going after 1 or 2 at a time. But there is legislation in Maryland, New York, Florida, Vermont, and Tennessee. We have submitted supporting testimony to those, and we are hoping to continue working on that as we go on, because we do support having genetic testing testing done for, Parkinson's, and we do not want anyone in the community to then be restricted or have their premiums increased, et cetera, later on when they are seeking insurance. It also is for better financial planning for your future and quality of life. Second issue is third issue really at this point is biomarker testing. This is not being led by the Fox Foundation. This is being led by the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. This was originally, I guess, several years ago, put in for just cancer biomarker coverage, but they have since expanded to all biomarker coverage. And as we know, there is no official biomarker test for Parkinson's right now, but we have engaged and supported this coalition with ALS, MS, Alzheimer's, breast cancer awareness, many other organizations, because when the time comes, we want health insurance to cover biomarker testing for any disease state. We think that that's just the best thing for, better healthcare, better delivery of care, and also, again, quality of life and coverage. And we don't think that it should be, excluded. So as you can see, it's, more than a dozen states right now have sent them in, and Zach has been so great in sending in these letters, following it, talking to lawmakers in states, because we want them to know that the Fox Foundation is heavily supporting this. Even though it doesn't benefit us, we're supporting our brothers and sisters in different disease states, as this is incredibly important. Last is our general access to care. We have not engaged on anything in states yet on this. This is mostly a federal issue, but once in a while you will see bills or initiatives related to access to care, like prescription drug affordability, social determinants of health would include things like reliable transportation, and obviously mental health access is always incredibly important to the Parkinson's community, removing barriers and making sure that the reimbursement for both telehealth and teletherapy for Parkinson's patients. So anytime we do see that, we will weigh in on that. But as an office of two, we just want people to know that we're not forgetting about these things. It's just that we are currently an office of two and have been focusing on some of the very direct related bills right now. And then this is really based around some state activities, but we want you to all know that we have an incredible action center that was created originally for the national plan, but we now have a state advocacy tab on that is directly linked in our PowerPoint, which we'll get out to you. And on this, you can download all of our one-pagers on these issues that I just talked about. There's also a how a bill becomes a law visual aid for how it works in the states. We also have a how to engage in your lawmakers. I know this is an international group, but if you have family or friends in the states and you want to tell them, oh, hey, there's something happening in Oklahoma, or hey, there's a registry bill in Massachusetts, I'm working, would love for you to send a letter. All of this is right here on that hub. And you can also get in touch with Zach and I anytime. And with that, I realized I did my entire presentation without letting him introduce himself to everyone. So I'd love for him to be able to, I'll stop sharing my screen. And I wanted to say thank you all for having me. I know that I'm throwing a lot out at you, but we are very motivated. We just started our team a year and a half ago. There's two of us. We have a lot to get done in 50 states, and we're really trying to support incredibly meaningful legislation for the Parkinson's community in the states. And then also for any of you across the globe, feel free to take anything of ours and use it, or stay in touch with us if there's anything that we can do to help tell your story here. We absolutely want to bring in all voices and thoughts. And with that, I'm going to say thank you and kick it over to Zach, and just let him just say hi real quick so that you know who he is.
Thanks, Julia. Hi, everybody. I do believe I last joined one of the monthly meetings here back in the fall of 2022. So it's been a little bit, but great to see everybody. My name is Zach Hardy. As Julia said, I am a part of the state government relations team for the Fox Foundation. I've been with the foundation since August of last year, and I'm really glad that everyone was able to see the presentation today that really goes over what we, Julia and I, are focused on for state legislation and state advocacy work for 2023. We're trying to be in as many places as possible with the resources that we have, and we would not be able to do it without support from other PD groups and advocates all over the country. I am based in New York and very excited to continue to join these meetings on a monthly basis. So thank you.
And thank you, Zach.